Bitcoin has been getting more and more interesting lately, and with the introduction of digital assets like NFTs on the platform, it's going from the most boring blockchain to possibly the most exciting. But if you're looking to get involved in Bitcoin and Bitcoin assets today, you first have to make a choice: ordinals or stamps. Which method do you want to get involved with, and what's going to help your business grow? So today we're going to talk all about that. We're going to dig into what these protocols are, how they compare, and which you should pick. My name is Trent Kennelly. I'm a Web3 marketing strategist, and this is the best place for you to learn about Web3, NFTs, blockchain, AI, and how to market it all. So that sounds good to you and you're excited. Make sure that you like this video. Subscribe to my channel if you're into it. Comment to let me know how you land on the ordinals versus stamps debate. I would love to get your thoughts about which one you think you're going to go with. Please do let me know down in the comments. But until then, let's get started. Okay, so I think we should start by getting a handle on these two ideas, ordinals and stamps. And let's start with ordinals. So I dove deep into ordinals in this video, which you should definitely check out to get a really good handle on this. But effectively, this is a solution to the NFT question that writes data to a Satoshi. So a Satoshi is 1/100 millionth of a Bitcoin, and it's the smallest possible denomination of a Bitcoin. So instead of having on-chain and off-chain data, like is happening on Ethereum right now, everything is in one location. A Bitcoin stamp, on the other hand, doesn't write to the Satoshi itself, but to the transaction. So it can take any transaction that occurs and embed it with certain code. That code is in the form of, something that the NFT can do, or the existence of the NFT itself. I don't want to use the term smart contract because it's not the same technology. But this is all a lot of big words to say that the code allows for digital assets to be placed on a layer over what's already happening through the Bitcoin protocol. So nothing is changing with the protocol itself. This is just kind of like icing on an already delicious cake. In effect, we have two different methods for NFT creation, both of which are intended to not only bring digital assets to Bitcoin in a bigger way, but also improve on issues that Ethereum's NFTs have faced. So one of those two protocols is probably going to reign supreme at the end of the day. And we'll get into what I think that's going to look like a little further in the video. But before we start pitting these two standards against each other, let's kind of compare them to their Ethereum counterparts to get a better feel for what we're looking at here. First, let's look at ordinals versus the Ethereum counterpart. And ordinals are most closely related to the ERC-721 protocol, which is an Ethereum standard for NFTs that are immutable. So what that means is that these cannot be changed. They're created and they can't be changed. Yes, they can be transferred, but they're not changeable after they've been created. Whereas ERC-1155 are kind of mutable. Okay, so you can either create them as immutable, unchangeable, or you can change them as much as you want if you create a mutable version of it. Okay, so that's one thing. Ordinals are also created completely on chain, and what that means is that rather than adding a smart contract with a blockchain transaction that records some data, it's etching the data like a stone carving onto the side of a Satoshi. So this also has this added benefit of requiring no validation to continue to use. So if you want to make something happen with an NFT, there's a validation step that you have to go through, which can be a little bit of a headache and expensive. That isn't a requirement when it comes to ordinals. An ERC-721 token being written onto the Ethereum blockchain would require independent sign-off by the miners, or in Ethereum's case, the staker. And eliminating the need for this independent validation process also drastically increases the speed of an ordinal compared to an ERC-721 token, which is amazing. And all of those points should then make this last point pretty obvious, but ordinals aren't tokens. With ERC-721, you're minting tokens. Those tokens, in the case of ERC-721, are assets. Ordinals, on the other hand, are more often allowing the creation of assets by modifying the basic state of a Satoshi. It sounds subtle, but what we're talking about is modification versus creation. Okay, great. So how are stamps and Ethereum different? So for stamps, it's more advantageous to compare it to ERC-1155. That's that standard that you could have mutability or immutability, the ability to change or not change the token after creation. Because with stamps, you can change things should you choose, okay? You're able to do everything with a stamp or an ERC-1155 that you can do with an ordinal or a 721 token, plus provide this flexibility that you need for changing those NFT properties, bridging the smart contract, or code between assets, etc. But beyond that specific thing, I'd say that there aren't a lot of differences here. They're kind of the same things that you would see between ERC 721 and Ordinals. It's faster, it's more efficient, and it's easier to implement. So the question you're all here for, what's the difference between ordinals and stamps? The first one, and probably the biggest, is again that mutability. So recall that with an ERC 721 token, which ordinals are modeled after, a minted NFT takes that N very seriously. It is a non-fungible token. No funging around on this. But ERC 1155 tokens, which stamps are similar to, allow for more fluid mutability. Users can create one of one or one of many assets, which allows for a lot more flexibility in NFT usage more generally. And another big issue is what I guess I'll call veracity. And this takes a bit of explaining to get to the issue, so just sit with me for a second. So there are two things, very broadly speaking, that occur when a Bitcoin changes hands. The coin transfers wallets and a transaction receipt is created. But data that's been sitting on a blockchain for a long time is sometimes still used when the coin is accessed, and sometimes it isn't. And when data is no longer in use, it's pruned. That is to say that the unused and unnecessary data is removed to free space for other data on the blockchain. So let's pretend that there's an ordinal written onto a Satoshi. We're going to call this a Sati boy, okay? And let's also pretend that you are the owner of 25% of all Bitcoin nodes in the world. Good for you, right? If you ask every one of your nodes to prune the same data at the same time, you can challenge the consensus as to what's true on the blockchain for that ordinal. Because remember, there is no central server for Bitcoin. There are servers all over the world, and if you're mining, you're part of that server system. So if you are saying something different with 25% of your servers than the rest of the 75% of the servers in the world, then all of a sudden there's going to be a question as to what the truth is. So if one person runs a lot of nodes and they take that action, they could challenge the truth as it's understood by all other nodes with respect to that Satoshi, and you could throw the whole ordinal system into chaos. Now, I think it's worth noting that that's a pretty far-fetched problem. It would take an enormous amount of computing power to get there, but it is nonetheless a completely exploitable possibility to just keep in the back of your mind. Stamps, on the other hand, don't have that issue because stamps aren't written onto a Satoshi. Stamps are written into the transaction itself. So the truth of its creation is itself immutable. You can, of course, still change things depending on how it's been created. That's the whole point of stamps. But the fact that the creation occurred in this way and the true owner and all of that information just can't be changed. It is truth. It is written into stone in the transaction, right? That's like saying Steve Jobs was a co-founder of Apple, right? You can't change that fact. It is a truth. So those are some pretty clear differences, if not a little technical. So let's bring it back to less techie areas. Which should you pick for your business? Now, trends are kind of suggesting that stamps is currently the it girl because in the last 30-day period, we've seen around 11,000 stamps created and only around 2,000 or so ordinals. But ordinals have been around for a lot longer, so there are a lot more ordinals. So it's kind of hard to tell based on that question, but it's still indicative that the new kid is getting a lot more attention right now. The question really comes down to two factors: how you want to use them and their marketability. Are you interested in simple PFPs, maybe a utility or two, but generally just kind of want something static and unchangeable? Then you can honestly pick either, right? Because ordinals is totally immutable, as we've discussed, but stamps is quasi-mutable. You can kind of do either. But if you want something that's changeable or that there are multiple versions of, then you don't have that possibility with ordinals. You have to look at stamps. When it comes to marketability, you're just trying to figure out if you can sell these things. And just like with real estate, the biggest question is location. If you want to sell a collection, the best place to do it is usually on a platform that specializes in it, like for Ethereum and Polygon. You can check out OpenSea. You can check out this video if you want more information on that. And those platforms are going to gain in popularity for Bitcoin as well, especially with stamps exploding as it has. There is going to be a platform for people to go to before much longer. But the question then is, what's going to be sold there? Not all platforms sell all things, right? You wouldn't expect to go to HomeDepot.com and order camera equipment. Home Depot made decisions about what they would sell and what they thought people would and would not come to their store to buy. That may be the same thing when it comes to ordinals or stamps. We may be making decisions about whether we're going to push one or both or whatever, okay? And if this trend is correct, it's probably going to be a problem for ordinals minters over stamps minters. That said, there are still 800,000 minted ordinals out there. Just that the technology has caught fire with stamps and people are already out there trying to capture that fire as fast as possible. But looking at this specific factor, I would tend to lead towards stamps. So there you go. That's a quick breakdown of ordinals and stamps. There's so much to get involved with here that I definitely think there's space for everyone. So let me know what you think about these two different technologies, and let me know kind of what you're thinking about picking if that's something that you're going towards trying to decide between these two technologies. I would love to know. Otherwise, make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel if you're into it, and I will catch you in the next one.